Greetings, growers from around the world. Jordan River here, back with more GrowCast, back with more GrowCast, back with more GrowCast. Today, we've got a brand new guest. Mike from GrowersHouse is here to talk about clones. We're talking about cloning today, but not just the basics and how-tos. We do get into that. We also get deeper into the science of propagation and adventitious roots and hormones. You're going to love this episode. It's a real knowledge bomb, so stay tuned till the end of it. We've also got a second part dropping in just a week. It's that good. Quick shout out to AC Infinity before we get started. They make the best grow gear in the game, acinfinity.com. Code GrowCast15 always. Go get yourself a new Grow Tent kit, everybody. A new propagation kit. You're going to need it. All right, let's get into it with Mike from GrowersHouse. Thank you for listening. Enjoy the show. Hello, podcast listeners. You are now listening to GrowCast. I'm your host, Jordan River, and I want to thank you for tuning in again today. Before we get started, as always, go to GrowCast.com. There you can find everything. Today's episode is all about cloning. I'm very, very excited to have on a brand new guest today, and we're going to talk about how to get perfect, healthy, lush clones every single time. And it's a really good discussion. We're going to go in deep. We're going to give you some general tips too. I know you're going to love it. So let's not waste any time. Let's bring on today's guest from GrowersHouse.com. We have Mike Chang. What's up, Mike?
Hey, how's it going, Jordan?
Good to see you, my friend. Welcome to the show. Listen, I want to thank you for helping out at Growers House and helping out the GrowCast community. You know, we were sending our listeners over there and using code GrowCast for 10% off the stash blend. And then me and you got talking and me and Tim got talking. It's really cool what you guys are doing over at Growers House, but why don't we start there? Can you give a brief intro for the audience about your background in cultivation and what brought you all the way to where you are now with Growers House?
Sure. So I started kind of like at home after I got out of the military in like 2011, and I liked it. It was fun. And then I ended up moving to Arizona and I got a job at a commercial cultivation, and that was pretty fun. But, you know, we really didn't know what we were doing. Like even the guy that was in charge didn't really seem like he knew what he was doing. So I decided, you know, I got a GI Bill. I'll go to school. So I went to the U of A. They have a really good agriculture program. I got a degree in ag tech management with the controlled environment ag focus. So like greenhouses, stuff like that. And then I started working actually in conventional ag for an ag supplier for about 4 years. So that gave me a lot of good experience on how like the standard conventional ag world works and a lot of the regulation information. And then at that time, I was also helping Nate Lipton, the CEO of Growers House, with his company and just getting his sales staff kind of trained up on newer techniques as well. And we just kind of talked, and he's a great guy, and I wouldn't mind working for him. And so I asked him if he was hiring, and so I jumped on. We kind of launched like a consulting thing because we saw the need to bring higher level knowledge just to maybe even just save on like water, like you just use efficiencies that come with farming that needed to come into cannabis. So once we established the consulting, I basically am now one of their technical crop advisors. I go through, you know, my region and I help all of our growers basically try to optimize their grow as far as like what they're using and then how they're using it, maximizing cost efficiencies, things like that. Just trying to make a good farm out of these cannabis grows.
Oh my God. So it sounds like you've got some technical kind of background and expertise, but you've also worked one-on-one with the growers, because that's really what matters, Mike, is when the rubber meets the road. And it's the people who can do both very well, who know the plant and know how it works, but also can manage these larger operations and keep these businesses afloat. Those are two totally different skills. And it seems like you kind of bridge that gap. So very excited to have you on today to talk to a pretty diverse audience here at GrowCast. We are mostly home growers, but a lot of people working in the industry listening to this show too.
Right.
So there's a lot that we could talk about, but I decided on clones. We decided on clones for this first episode because I think it's such an important topic, Mike. A lot of people drop the ball on cloning. A lot of people don't even know the importance yet. Like, let me set the stage that way. I feel like there's two types of people. There's either the people who don't clone because they haven't been kicked in the teeth yet, meaning they haven't grown a strain and realized, holy crap, this phenotype is so special. It's a unicorn and I didn't clone it. And you're like, oh, your heart's broken. It's like a kick in the teeth, like I said. Or there's the people who have learned that lesson and they're either cloning everything or they're not kind of able to, and they need a little bit of help, you know, from guys like us. So So why do you think it's so important to clone at home? And let's start from kind of the 30,000 foot view of your thoughts on cloning.
I mean, the way you phrase that is great, because I like to zoom out and look at like how cloning plays into the ag world. And, you know, if you go to any greenhouse, they're growing like 3 different cultivars, 3 different strains of tomato. That's it. And those tomatoes, a lot of the times, were usually asexually propagated, cloned off of a mother plant and just thrown into rock wool. And then they just live the rest of their lives, the few months that they're alive, in rock wool, and they continue to grow. So having the ability to propagate plants, like all of your house plants are cloned. Like none of your house plants actually start by seed. This Z plant behind me, they stick leaves and perlite, you know, that's how they clone these. So the art of cloning and maintaining and keeping genetics is kind of one of the ways that we've been able to breed such either hardy or kind of desirable traits into all of the plants that we either consume or use as industrial goods. So cloning is an important part in basically breeding and genetic selection. So if you have any desire to advance the plant in any way, then you're going to have to learn how to germinate, and you're going to have to learn how to clone, basically. So I think that's cloning, plays a huge part in just growing in general. And it teaches growers a lot of lessons about what plants need when they're the most kind of susceptible and kind of at their weakest point in growth.
That's a really good way to put it. And you're right. It's an art that's bigger than just the crops that we cultivate. It's been around forever, and really ours do very well. You know, like you said, tomatoes, things like that do very well when it comes to propagation. Mm-hmm. But why don't we go there? Talk about the concept of cloning. Like, what are we doing when we're taking off a piece of foliage and we're trying to clone it into a new plant? What's happening with the plant?
So basically what we get when we clone is, you know, normally if you pop a seed, there's like that little embryo of a plant inside that seed, and that radical pushes down and that becomes your taproot. In a cloned plant or in monocots and stuff, we have something called adventitious roots, and those actually come out of stem portions of the plant. So even if the plant originally came from seed and it had that taproot, a lot of the times it'll transition to adventitious roots because of the way that it grows, its water needs, etc. Things like corn, you know, like grains, monocots, things like that. So when we are cloning, like what we're trying to do is basically take a piece of the plant that doesn't really have roots and induce rooting in one of the stem portions of that plant, create those adventitious roots. You know, a lot of guys do that with like air layering on like fig trees. You can literally grow roots out of any portion of the stem with that cambium. If you have it in the right conditions, and of course, if you boost it with hormones, it will really increase that rate of cell differentiation into roots. So like when we clone plants, we're basically just trying to promote root growth out of stem tissues from a cutting of that plant, so that we can basically get that plant growing on its own as a separate plant without its original root system.
Perfect copy. And like you said, the air layering is interesting because at that point, you're literally growing those roots while it's still attached to the plant. They might kind of carve off a little bit of the bark of the tree or whatever, and then create that proper environment, like you said, which is what? Very, very moist and very, very dark, ideally?
Yeah, those are the 2 biggest factors: is moisture, darkness, and then temperatures. Generally, you want to keep them a little bit cooler, but it's the temperature and the lack of light that's really going to kind of trigger processes in the cells that can differentiate into differentiating into the root cells that they need to be. It's kind of like, they're almost like if you think of like starfish, when you chop a starfish in half and you get like 2 starfishes. That's basically what you're doing by cloning a plant, is you're basically creating a clone literally of that plant from a smaller portion of it. So it's genetically identical. Yeah. So it's pretty cool.
And these adventitious roots are totally different from the taproot, like you said, because like if we do root pruning, which is very, very common outside of the cannabis world.
Yeah.
But people worry all the time. Hey, when I put my steak down in my pot, I hear a rip, rip, rip. And I always tell them, no problem with adventitious roots. Not so with the taproot, right? You don't want to damage that main taproot, but these adventitious roots, they're adventurous. Maybe that's the same prefix. Yeah. I don't know. But yeah, they're different from the taproot in that regard, right?
Yeah. So the taproot is actually like almost like a part of the stem. It's like it's very much attached to the main vascularity of the plant, like the quote unquote main vein, that xylem and phloem going up and down that main stalk. So if you do break that or damage it, the plant is far more susceptible to disease. It's far more susceptible to losing the internal water pressure it needs. With adventitious roots, it's almost more like they grow like, I guess, fingers, and you could lose a couple fingers and it's not that big of a deal. But the taproot's kind of like baked into the spine of the plant. So if you to like lose a piece of your pelvis, not as good as losing a finger, you know? So that's kind of the body metaphor I would say about like the importance of like keeping those types of roots safe.
That's fantastic. That's exactly right. And in the case of plants, they don't mind losing a finger and growing back a few new ones. In fact, sometimes it's good, but you don't want to damage that spine, like you said. Fantastic analogy. Yeah. Now, when we're pushing these adventitious roots, you said, you know, there are things going on, there are processes going on. I know it has a lot to do with hormones, hormones going on in the plants, and then also xenohormones that we add in different ways. And also nutrients are being used, right? Like what does it take to create these adventitious roots when it's just a little cutting with so few resources within the plant tissue?
Right. That cutting doesn't have the advantage of like a seed, where the seed has a lot of like starch stored up to use as food. So generally, what I generally recommend is making sure that the mother plant health is very high. If you ensure that your mother plant is not deficient in anything, then generally the way the plants work is they'll have a natural sink of sugars and different types of like elements that they would need for growth in a little bit of an excess if they're being fed properly. And they can use that excess when they're transplant or when they're turned into clones to basically grow. You're not really feeding the plant until it has roots. That's the thing that a lot of people should know too, is if it doesn't have roots, whatever nutrient solution you're putting on that clone plug, that's actually not going into the plant in the way you think. It's really just, it's moisture getting up through that xylem, through that xylem, and just keeping the plant rigid. But the nutrient utilization is not as good as if it had like a real root system. So the nutrition really plays into the plant maybe later in like the later stages of cloning. And generally it's going to be like a very light, like veg solution, something higher in nitrogen, but still with PK. And then something with a good amount of calcium and a good amount of magnesium. Calcium to build those new cell walls, magnesium to start filling out more chlorophyll, hopefully as it grows upwards. So once you have like that 1.5 solution in that root zone, you're usually fine, because as the roots start to grow out of that stem, it'll start to use that nutrition slowly. And the requirement of nutrition for a plant that small is very low, because it's not really in a growth mode. When it's in that cloning stage, it's more in like let's stop and figure out what the heck is going on. It's like, oh gosh, we need roots. And when we apply that little bit of auxins, we're definitely going to go deep into the auxin cytokine talk here in a bit. But when you apply those auxins, it really triggers a response like, yo, we're high in auxins. We need some cytokines. And that pushes the signals down to that base of the plant to, oh, yo, there's a lot of auxins here. We need to balance it out with cytokines. And where's the best place that we get cytokines? From the tips of the roots. So that's what kind of like this crosstalk starts to come into play immediately as soon as we start to make those clones. But again, for the nutrition part, you don't need a lot. Just needs to be a balanced, like veg type of a solution. Something higher on the nitrogen. Again, needs definitely some good phosphorus too for that new cell growth and division. But nothing special. There's no secret sauce to a clone formula. It's just how you apply is more important than what you're applying.
Come and join GrowCast membership, the greatest community in cannabis cultivation. What are you waiting for? GrowCast.com/membership. It's something that every grower should have. Not only will we personally solve your garden problems and be on the lookout 24/7 for your messages so we can take care of anything in your garden. You don't have to go to Google. It's a terrible idea to run to Facebook. Come and get a GrowCast membership. We'll walk you through the whole process, fixing up your plants, identifying any pests or deficiencies, and teach you what's going on and how to solve it in the future. Not to mention, you get to connect with hundreds of growers from around the world, trading all sorts of genetics, helping each other out in their garden. We're a positive community of growers. We're not here to argue about breeders or provenance or anything like that. We're here to uplift each other in our gardens. Plus, you get all sorts of perks, like weekly live streams for members only. You get discounts on products that nobody else gets. You even get 20% off the products we're talking about in this episode. Organoplugs and the clone gel. Members get 20% off those. No one else does. So come and check it out. GrowCast.com/membership. It's the price of lunch. Every grower should have one. And the fact is, you shouldn't be growing alone. And with a GrowCast membership, you never have to grow alone. Come and join your new cultivation family. Would love to have you in there. GrowCast.com/membership. And having those minerals present, I think, is a big deal. And like you said, I think people go one way or the other. They either do too much too often, or I'm very guilty of this. They'll wait too long. You know, you hear on a lot of podcasts, like they don't need much. They don't need much. But like you said, as soon as they have roots, they're capable of uptaking that solution. You don't want the solution to be strong, but I do like the idea of getting it in there early. And yeah, I'm excited to dig into hormones. But I have one more question about adventitious roots.
Yeah.
Is cannabis particularly good at producing them? My understanding is it's very hard to clone some species of plants. Is this why cannabis, like tomatoes, likes to be buried deeply? Is this why when I have a seedling that maybe stretches out because it didn't get enough light and it's all wonky and falling over, you kind of like bury it up to its neck, so to speak, and it turns out fine? Is that because this plant has the ability to like adapt to the above soil and below soil scenario based on where that soil line is readily? Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I would say your line of thinking is like basically on the right track, like in my opinion, because like the way I see it, it's an annual plant. It's made to, you know, germinate and survive that year in whatever conditions that year gives it. So it's not a woody long-term shrub or anything like that. It stays basically with a vibrant green cambium for most of its life, especially if it's grown naturally. You don't get like the woody thick stalks that you get on like a commercial outdoor cannabis plant. Generally, that plant was evolved to grow into like a stalk, like a green stalk. And as such, like that cambium layer is a lot easier to penetrate with like water, and it's a lot easier for those cells to differentiate and break out into root cells. So you can bury things like tomatoes, you know, cannabis, all those like green annual plants can very easily transition their stem cells, the cells in the stem portion of their plant, to convert into some root cells. Now, the thing is, ideally, you don't actually want to do that. Ideally, you would have given that plant enough light such that it didn't stretch so much, because it is using a lot of its initial resources by doing that stretch just to get enough light. If you give the plants enough light so that they don't do that stretch, you one, don't have to plant them that deeply, and two, they end up pushing out roots just as deep because they have all of the energy needed to chase the water. And then we're also going to go talk about water table stuff here in a little bit when we talk about proper clone plugging. So yeah, we'll get on that.
Perfect.
But yeah, I think a big part of it is it's beneficial. Well, it's not beneficial. It can do it. It's a very good capability that cannabis has. It's not an ideal practice, but the way that we're growing and the equipment that we're using, it benefits us that cannabis has those abilities to kind of differentiate the cells on its stems a little bit faster without like negative effects of being buried too deep. Because some plants don't like it when you bury them stem deep. They'll start to rot, and because their woody parts really can't transition as fast, and then they start to, you know, mold basically, or get necrotic, being too wet.
See, that's why I always like talking to guys like you who have grown a lot of different plants. That those differences always fascinate me. But you make a really good point that I'd like to drill down on just briefly, which is light intensity is a huge issue when it comes to the early stages, seedling stages, and also clone after rooting. And you're exactly right. That's what people don't like this answer, because what they want to do, Mike, is download a PPFD reader on their phone, and they want to stick it under the canopy, and they want to try to get a reading. And I tell them, even if you get the fanciest light meter, it is so hard to get an accurate reading on this little. Just learn the signs of the plant. When the plant's not getting enough light, it's going to do exactly what I described. The stem's going to turn into a spaghetti string.
Yeah.
And the opposite is also true. If the nodes are stacked that tight, and they're all yellow because this photosynthesis is driving them hard, I think that's way better than any PPFD reader. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and you hit it on the nose with how the plants look. So, like, if you have too much light and it's too stacked, and you have not enough light and it stretches out, just find the middle ground. A lot of guys, like, they try to change their lights or anything. All you have to do is, a lot of the time, lower the light if you have a low intensity light. Because if it is a low intensity light, it's so low intensity that it's not going to burn your plants by lowering it down. Like, I've popped seeds under, you know, like 400 ppfd of light, and it's fine. 500 ppfd of light, and it's fine. You know, if you pop seeds out in the field here in the Arizona sun, it's like 2000 ppfd, you know? the plants are adapted and can adapt to varying levels of light. And people should know that the unnatural light that we put on will never match the amounts of light that the plants will get naturally under the sun.
Yeah, that is true. I think where people go wrong is, like you said, when they have a high-powered fixture hanging right on top of their plant, for instance. I like having a separate clone light. You know what I mean?
A heat-creating high-powered fixture is no bueno. Because think about it, like if you touch the ground outside, it's not hot like there's a lamp baking it, because the sun is so far away that the heat energy, the IR energy, is getting dissipated. But when you have a light that's close, it's getting all of that IR and it's heating up your soil, making a non-ideal condition for the little seedling. So yeah,
that's so true.
It's different because it's artificial light, but just know that it's hard to overdo the artificial light. It's very easy to underdo the artificial light.
Okay, well, let's talk about what's going on with these hormones, because you said we're going to dig deep into auxins and cytokins, and these are things that we have heard thrown around, right? And I know they're kind of a classification of hormone, and there's different ones, but like, I want to understand. I want my audience to understand, what are they actually doing? How does it relate to what I'm putting on the plants with my cloning gel? And where should we start when we start thinking about hormones like auxins, cytokins, and gibberellins and these things?
Okay, awesome. So I think the one thing that people should know about auxins and cytokins, if they want like a human analog, it's like estrogen and testosterone. Like all humans, men and women, have estrogen and testosterone. Like everyone has that. And then all plants have cytokins and auxins. The balance of the two determines how the plant grows, just like the balance of the two in humans determines, certain characteristics for humans. So for plants, when it comes to any talk about cytokins, you have to mention auxins, and any talk of auxins generally has to include cytokins, because within the plant, it's a crosstalk mechanism. So cytokine, let me back up and just to clarify, the hormones that we apply to plants in order to induce rooting, like things like IBA, they're auxins. So just now that we know, now for a frame of reference, we're applying auxins. So why are we applying auxins? I mentioned this earlier. If we're applying those auxins onto that part of the stem where we want to induce rooting, what we're actually doing isn't putting something there that grows roots. We're putting something there that signals to the plant, hey, we have too much of this hormone. We need the organs that we naturally produce that make the counterbalancing hormone. So in that regard, what you're doing is you're applying auxins, creating a cytokinin response, or a cytokinin response that elicits the need for cytokinins, which in turn elicits the needs for roots. And then that's when you get the cell differentiation that happens when your the cells on the stem start to transition into root cells. And then once that happens and they start to get a cytokine response from the ends of the roots, because basically a lot of the cytokinins made in plants is made on the very tips of the roots, called root caps. And those new growing cells will release cytokinins as they're growing, and then they kind of go up into the plant, and then the plant uses that signal to know what's going on in the root zone and how things are available to grow itself. And then in certain sites, it creates auxins that flow back down the phloem and then signal to the roots. When the roots get the sugars that the top of the plant made, signals to the roots like, okay, we got this much auxin going on up top. We need to produce this much cytokinin to kind of balance it out. And then that equates to, okay, so we don't need roots everywhere. We only need to go roots this way. Cytokinins play a role in actually how the cells of the roots form too. So it can have an inhibitory response where it keeps the roots from overgrowing. And that is there because it only grows in response to the auxins from the top of the plant. So just to, I guess, simplify this, when we apply auxins, it forces the plant to make more cytokinins, and more cytokinins are produced in the roots. So by applying auxins, we're promoting root growth. Now, the opposite is true too, and this is why I always tell people, like, maybe it's kind of a good idea to add some kelp products into your line, because kelp products, what they actually do is they add a little bit of exogenous cytokinins from the kelp plant itself, which goes in through the roots and then goes up into the plant. That signals to the plant, yo, we got a lot of cytokinins. We must have a lot of root tips. We need to grow the top of the plant more to catch up with the roots. And that's why a lot of times you get better cell differentiation, better cell division, more branchy bushiness out of your plants when you apply kelp. So it's all a back and forth. You need to apply auxins to increase cytokinins, and as the cytokinins increase, your auxins increase. So that's the crosstalk that causes the root growth in clone plants that
Wow.
we're seeking.
I have never understood it better. Thank you so much for that explanation. And that makes sense to why we're applying something so similar to the native hormone right there on the the exposed plant tissue on the inside, right? Because that's really what we want to target with that indole 3-butyric acid, like you said. And I didn't know. It's like you said, I assumed that triggers the plant growth because that's the hormone you want. You're saying no. It's actually raising the level of the other hormone, triggering the plant to try to keep up with the ones that produce roots or are usually produced in the roots, therefore grow some dang roots. It's already day 7.
Yeah. So that's the thing. It's not like IBA is like, I mean, I guess it is, but it's almost tricky because it's not like making the roots. It's forcing the plant to make the roots to balance out the hormone levels. What the plant is really doing is balancing out hormone levels more than anything. And the roots are basically a byproduct of the plant trying to balance its hormone levels out in that little stage.
Yeah, that's incredible. I've never understood that better. Now, are there any other classifications of hormones that really come into play here? I mean, I've heard things about gibberellins. I've heard things like tricontinol is one that I've heard almost described as kind of like a hormone health booster in general.
Yeah.
But what other hormones are playing around here?
So there's a couple of so there are the main, I think 5 hormones. There's auxins, cytokinins, gibberellins. There's abscisic acid, and I think ethylene is classified as a hormone type. This is stuff that the ag world uses a lot, actually. So auxins, for example, I don't know if you've heard of a chemical called 2,4-D, but that is a potent herbicide. And basically what that herbicide does is it mimics auxins at a very high, a very high efficacy. It mimics auxins very strongly. Like how aspartame is 100 times sweeter than sugar. 2,4-D is 100 times stronger than normal plant-produced auxins. So it basically makes the plant grow to death. That's what 2,4-D does. It's crazy, right?
Wow.
So these auxins are used, these hormones are used in the conventional ag and the turf and ornamental world a lot to exploit the way that plants grow to either kill them or to make them better. Something like cytokinins. Cytokinins are also applied to turf a lot because you get the cytokinins in the soil and that makes the top of the plant, the blades of grass go, yo, we got a lot of cytokinins. We need to boost the grass production, big, tall grass blades. So golf courses use that. Gibberellins we're just in the 2000s kind of scratching the surface on a lot of the actions of gibberellins. Everyone knows the main actions, they do cell elongation. If any guy's ever gotten pro-gib or some sort of gibberellic acid and sprayed it on their plants, they'll see the plants go, they stretch up and then they 2-leaf, 3-leaf, and they freak out. That's because the stretching out, we've kind of figured that out through certain metabolic pathways, like the 2-leafing, 3-leafing, all those kind of secondary symptoms of gibberellic acid application. We don't know. No one's fully done all of the studies in all of the different plants because the problem is gibberellin is kind of like a catch-all trigger hormone. In certain plants, it will induce certain growth, small, dwarfism. In the same family of plants, different cultivars, it will induce elongation. So it's it's very genetically dependent. A lot of the times they're used in things like gibberellin, for example. If you need the stretch, but you don't really worry about anything else, rice. You need to keep the rice over the patty, you add the gibberellin to get the stretch. But then you stop, and then you don't really need any of the other properties. You let the plant grow naturally. So in certain phases, gibberellins can be very important to certain growers. I don't have enough knowledge about how it plays into cannabis cultivation, and I haven't found personally a normal use of gibberellic acid in the course of growing. Auxins for rooting, cytokinins to improve cell differentiation, branching, and upward growth. But gibberellins, I generally don't recommend people do anything with that. Same with ABA, abscisic acid. I don't know enough about it. I don't think there's been enough research about it. Ethylene, there's been some research that definitely shows that it finishes out flowers or it shortens your senescence time, the time it takes for the plant to naturally kind of die off. So that is actually can be good or bad, depending on if you're trying to fit your cycle in a time window or not. But generally, ethylene abscisic acid and gibberellins, I don't recommend for cannabis until there's more research that shows this genotype responds this way to gibberellic acid. Until we have that data, it's kind of too much of a risk. And I think if you just focus on just even cytokines during growth, you'll get the benefits of adding a exogenous hormone without risking your crop at all. If that makes sense.
Absolutely incredible breakdown, Mike. I got one more question, because I'll tell you, as a guy who talks to a lot of growers of all sorts of, for years now, of all sorts of different walks of life, the only time I've seen gibberellic acid recommended to be used is when people are having a really hard time popping a seed. Maybe they've got an old seed from decades ago and it won't pop, and they add gibberellic acid to try to improve seed. And I've also heard from these same people who said, I got it to grow, but even using it on the seed, the plant in veg got all wonky, as if it stuck around. You know what I mean? It must have hung around for a little while. And so they kind of like cautioned against it. But could you see there being any truth to that it would improve seed?
There's absolutely truth to that, because it is used as a germination treatment in a lot of other crops as well. Again, though, there are, just like you said, there's downward secondary effects that we can observe, but we don't know the mechanism of. So it's kind of like, we know that, germination rates are good, but when they germinate, they grow weird for the first couple of weeks. And if your grow is cool with that and the plants seem to recover, because they usually do, then you're fine. And germination is the most important thing, then you're fine, because you got the germination rates that you wanted. But, it might have maybe a little bit more lag time before the plants are productive, but that's not an issue for you because the germination was more important to you. In those cases, it's fine. Another thing is like hollow stemming. If you're getting plants that kind of grow too fast and that xylem doesn't fill out, it's been like gibberellic acid has been used on like trees and stuff to fill out the woodiness in trees, because it's like a growth promoter, but in weird specific ways like that. And that's the issue, is like, it's not a generalist growth promoter. It's like, it hits these mechanisms in weird angles that really affect other ways that the plant grows. I wouldn't say maybe like negatively, but definitely not in a normally productive way. Like a 2-3 leafing fan leaf that is very small and thin, that's not a good stage of growth for that plant. But it generally grows out of it. But that stage of growth was like, it focused on weird other growth instead of general growth.
So good, Mike. What a great breakdown of hormones. I have not heard anyone explain it in such understandable ways on this show. So thank you for that. And
cool.
And I wanted to go deep first, because there are a lot of longtime listeners. And next I want to talk about, really upping your clone game, applicable, practical advice, and hear how you take care of your cloning techniques and have your clone game set up. So I'm very excited to get into this. And to be fair, there are also growers who are very experienced, longtime growers who just don't clone. They're not good at it. They haven't set up the space yet, what have you. So I really want to encourage whoever's listening to this, whoever's watching this, make sure you start cloning today. Like I said, you're either going to learn the easy way from listening to this podcast, or you're going to learn the hard way when you lose that unicorn forever. So start cloning today, and let's hear Mike's advice on first how to get started, kind of gathering the right gear and setting up your space. We'll move on to cloning technique next, but how do you recommend people get started as far as buying the right stuff?
For sure. Just one quick on that, just start cloning today. Take a cutting of an ivy plant, throw it in a clear glass of water, and watch the roots form and grow. Like, starting cloning is the best way to like become an expert at cloning, because once you do it once, you get better every iteration. But to the equipment. So the first thing, before I had this bolded, like what I really want to make sure that your growers know is the difference between cleaning and sanitizing. Before we do anything, cleaning is you're taking off all of the other particles on that surface or on those things that you don't need. After that, you have to sanitize. Sanitizing is basically disinfecting and making the surfaces of whatever surface or utensil inert, nothing living there. So you have to do both. You have to do both every time. If you're going to clean, you're going to sanitize. If you need to sanitize something, you got to clean it first. So now that that's out of the way, the easiest way to sanitize is with bleach. Bleach kills not only bacteria, but it kills viruses. It kills everything. It deactivates protein and RNA, DNA way faster than anything else. Don't use isopropyl alcohol. Takes 30 minutes to kill HLV. Bleach takes 30 seconds. So this is the big thing. If you're gonna take this seriously and do this in the best way, giving yourself the best success possible, you're gonna disinfect with like something like bleach, and then you're going to clean every surface before you disinfect. Now and just as if you wanted to clip this would be great. If basically most bleaches are like 6 to 9%. So if you want to make that sanitizing solution that brings you at about 200 ppm of free chlorine, generally you want about a tablespoon of bleach, like household, unscented, ungelled bleach from like Clorox, 1 tablespoon into 1 gallon. That will give you about a 200 ppm sanitizing solution. If you want to go hardcore, you do a quarter to a half gallon. That'll give you about a 1 to 10 solution. That is a solution for hard disinfecting of porous surfaces. Like if you have concrete floor that isn't finished and you see algae growing, you do that 10% solution, you let that sit, and then you rinse it off, and then that'll be a good disinfectant. But yeah, bleach is the way to go. 1 tablespoon per gallon.
That's great advice on the dosage. And one other thing I heard about bleach was to not add it to hot water. A lot of people, they're trying to clean something and they think use hot water, but the hot water denatures or deactivates the bleach.
It breaks down the bleach faster than it normally would, and the chlorine ends up gassing off. Like you actually want to use kind of as cool of a water as possible, because that actually keeps the chlorine from gassing off. And then you let the chlorine gas off on the surface, and that's what does the disinfecting. Like as you wipe, that chlorine smell is the smell of being clean, because that smell is what's killing off whatever's on the surface. You're like creating a gas cloud of basically creating sanitized surfaces. So it's
listen, it's the grow. We're using chemical warfare, victory by any means. And I will say on that note, a lot of growers fail here, Mike. A lot of growers. And I'll tell you, it doesn't matter if they're home growers or commercial cultivators. There are clean growers and there are dirty growers. Yeah. And you know who you are. And, I'm guilty of that myself a lot of the time. And we've said it a million times on the show, you got to keep it clean. I think cloning, you make a good point, probably the most important time to keep something clean, because you're severing the plant. You're exposing the internal organs to the environment around you.
Yep.
So I really think that it's super, super important to keep it clean. Great place to start, Mike.
Yeah. I mean, I just iterate that because we've had so much HLV instances. We're starting to see a lot of like hop stunting. We're starting to see alfalfa mosaic, all these mosaic viruses from conventional ag creep into cannabis. They don't necessarily cause the worst effects, like all the mosaics, but they're present. And any endophyte, anything that's in the plant sapping metabolic energy is not good. So we don't want to spread viruses. We don't want to spread Pythium or Fusarium around. And yeah, the plants are the most vulnerable. They literally have their main vein cut. It's like having a central line in your body just exposed to the air. You got to keep everything else clean around you. But going back to the equipment, sorry for the sand. I freak out when I see like dirty surfaces in clone rooms. It's like you're sabotaging yourself. You can't do that.
Yeah, and growers are scared of viroids, Mike. That's the one thing. Like we're not as scared as insect pests as we should be, but viroids freak out growers. We don't want them, and this is how to solve that. So it's an important message. But also when you head into gear here and equipment, don't neglect to talk about my new favorite cloning setup, which is sold at GrowersHouse.com.
Oh yeah,
I am loving. Well, first of all, I'm loving this Ventana plant gel. The mustard squeeze top. Yeah. The mustard squeeze top, Mike. Who was that? Was that you?
That was a team effort. Honestly, because a lot of the technical crop advisors, we go around and we actually see what large commercial growers are doing. How are they finding the most efficient way to do things? And we saw places using like sriracha bottles, ketchup squeeze bottles, all sorts of things like that. And we're like, why isn't this already made? Why are they having to put it into a different vessel and contaminate a new vessel? So boom, we were just like, yeah, let's make it. And we did. And it kind of worked out really well. The type of plastic that they chose was very good, easy to clean too. So yeah, the applicator tip was baller. I like that.
Oh my God, man. Total game changer. It's the high strength cloning gel is what we're looking at here, people. It's the higher strength IBA, and it has a little, exactly what you'd find on like a sriracha top bottle. That's exactly what it is. And makes it so much easier to just squeeze a little bit into each hole. I'm going to collectively save 13 weeks from never having to swipe each clone through my little plate of gel. And then you also introduced me to Organoplugs. And I want to talk about this for just a second, man, because this is my new go-to plug. I've always been a fan of the other brand name plugs, but there's one major problem with them, Mike, that bothers me and bothers a lot of people. Do you know what I'm about to say here with those other types of plugs?
I think so. Go ahead.
It's the biodegradability, man. You look in your compost and they're there 5 years later.
You have a little sponge. You have a little like pile of sponges sitting in the corner. Yeah.
Yes. And so someone told me that it's a synthetic or plastic polymer of some kind. And it's like, look, I want people to grow their own, obviously, but that's waste product that we don't need. And so you sent me some of these Organoplugs, and they're just compressed peat, and they're a little bit bigger. Mm-hmm. All you need to make them is a little bit bigger, and your clone success rate is going to go up so much, Mike. I'm telling you, it's the dry back that kills a lot of these people. And when you, just like growing in soil, when you have a bigger container of media, it's so much more forgiving with over and under watering. You sized those things perfectly, and they don't fall apart. I listen, I don't want to see them blowing smoke up GrowersHouse's butt here, but that stuff is great. I love the Organoplugs. I love the clone gel, and I'm using some right now and loving it.
I'm glad you brought up the tall thing too, because this is exactly what I was going to mention. Those particular, so the Organoplugs I like because they have far less of that polymer. You do not get the sponge. They basically break down into basically just like media, like cocoa. But the one thing is like the tall plugs give you, like on a short plug that's about an inch, your water gradient, you have about like an inch of water there. On the tall plug, like half an inch of water. On the tall plugs, you have like an inch and a half of water gradient in that plug itself. So the root zone has so much more time, and it has like more of a natural inclination to search down for water. And that's where the plug can go on a tall plug. On a shallow plug like Rockwool, you get the kind of roots going everywhere, and it's just kind of like, it's not ideal. You have to water constantly because those top roots will dry out so fast. But when you use a tall plug, it allows those roots to kind of naturally go down where they're supposed to because there's water down there. Because, shorter plugs, they'll dry like 360. On a tall plug, the way that the trays usually sit in the thing, they dry from the top down like a normal pot of media would. So yeah, I always recommend the tall plugs when people are getting those Organoplug trays, because for cannabis, you need a little bit more of you need to reduce the amount of labor. Basically, you don't want to have to check and water constantly. You want there to be a good normal period where the plants can just slowly search for water instead of just being, I'm dry, I'm wet, I'm dry. Like that slow search for water is going to definitely help you root a lot better than like the constant back and forth cycling of a root zone.
Yeah, it's so true, man. It's like, I would relate it to, if you've ever grown in like a 5-gallon pot in living soil and how difficult that can be with a heavy feeder like cannabis is, and how you got to top dress all the time, and the watering goes really quickly, and the microbes get dry and they kind of die off, and then they're over water. And then you switch to like a 15 or a 25-gallon pot, and you're like, holy crap, like life is so much easier. It's the exact same thing, switching from those little plugs, rooter plugs or whatever, to the bigger Organoplugs, the taller, deeper Organoplugs. So I highly recommend it. That's a game changer. We shout out to a bunch of people in the Discord community who are just killing it. I think this is Ziggy's, if I remember correctly. Yes. Ziggy's looking good. This is a guy named Here to Learn from Canada who's got a great clone picture there. And we're just looking at big wizard beard clones hanging down to the floor for those who are audio listeners. And yeah, man, this is what we're after. We're really, I think, Mike, it's important to say here before we get into technique, you got your clone gel, you got your plugs, you got your dome, you've got everything you need for success. You got some sharp scissors and a cleaning solution. You should be able to pull 90% success rate plus out of virtually, I know some are harder, some are easier, out of virtually any cultivar. You should be able to pull 9 out of 10 plus. Do you agree with that? If you're not pulling that, something's wrong.
If you're using a cloning gel and you have a humidity solution, depending on the quality of cuts that you're taking, you should basically have like a 99 or a very high, if not complete, success rate, because all of the odds are stacked in your favor at that point. It's really up to the genetic potential of the plant. So yeah, if you have all of that, you should be at about like max success rate. But again, it's going to really fall down, of course, to a lot of the cultural practices too, making sure that you're checking those plants at those certain moments that you need to, and the right equipment like the dome, make sure you're getting at least like a 7-inch dome, because you don't want a dome that's too small. You need all that air volume to create like enough air exchange, because the plants are still breathing somewhat, and you need a lot more air exchange, because if they run out of CO2 and they'll stop, and when they stop, they also stop root growth. That's another reason why we crack the vents. The cracking the vents is not just to harden the plants off, but it's also for air exchange, because the plants do need, fresh CO2 coming in to promote that root growth as well.
Such a good point. The last thing you want is a short dome that's overcrowded with cuttings that you left too many leaves on. Yeah. Now we're in big trouble. But let's just recap here everything we've got. We've got our tray. We've got our plugs. Hopefully we've got something good like Organoplugs. Yep. You've got a humidity dome, which will allow you to control that humidity. Let's say that we're in at 60% to begin with, so it's nothing that crazy. Mm-hmm. You've got your scissors ready to go. You've got your cloning gel. Are you going to grab a heat mat? I know it depends on your space, but what do you think about heat mats, Mike?
Yeah, so heat mats, what my recommendation is, if you can keep the ambient conditions of the room that those plants are going to be in at ideal conditions, so like 75 to about 82 degrees, if you can keep the room at that temperature, and if you can keep the room at 50 or 65% relative humidity, then generally you probably won't need a heat mat. If you can't keep it at 75 to 82 and 65 relative humidity, then you should use a heat mat or a lamp or something to heat that root zone of the plant, to keep it from falling under that kind of like 70 mark, because it really slows the cell differentiation and growth if you don't have, your temperatures in that higher 70-ish range.
That's a great point. And Mike, I've come around on heat mats because back in the day, they didn't have controllers. You would just plug them in and they would light up.
Yeah.
And you cook your plants. But you're so right. Now I turn them down to low. I put mine on the lowest setting, and it's going to keep them warm. Don't go putting your cloning tray on like concrete or something that's going to sap that heat. Yeah. And from there, you're ready to get started. You're ready to take cuts. So what's your strategy when you're getting in there, actually slicing the plant, de-leafing or not? Talk to me about it. That's our show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you to Mike from Growers House. Awesome guest, GrowersHouse.com. Go check it out. You can use code GrowCast on the Stash Blend. And remember, members of GrowCast membership getting 20% off Organoplugs and the Clone Gel. That's GrowCast.com/membership. Before we wrap it up, quick shout out to AC Infinity. They make the best grow gear in the game. ACinfinity.com, code GrowCast15. Get your savings. Go grab a new propagation kit. You need a new 4x4 grow kit with a great light and fans and everything. AC Infinity is who we recommend. Best grow gear in the game. Code GrowCast15 on the website. Code GrowCast10 on Amazon. Saves you on AC Infinity products. Thank you to AC Infinity. And finally, shout out to Rooted Leaf Nutrients. If you need new nutrients, if you're not totally satisfied with yours, rootedleaf.com, code GrowCast for 20% off the best nutrients in the game. That's it for today, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. Stay safe out there, most importantly, and never grow alone. Stick around with GrowCast. Bye, everybody. See you next time. Stay tuned for part 2. Peace.